Hello and welcome back to English Language Arts class. Today we are looking at comparing adjectives or adjectives that compare two or more things together. So adjectives that compare, we're talking about ones that you may see the word more or most in front of these adjectives, or there'll be adjectives that end in the suffixes or est. Well, let's get a reminder of what adjectives are. Adjectives are words that describe a noun. So when you see words like fuzzy, funny, smelly, tall, heavy, these are words that describe how nouns are, or how people, places, or things are. Could be how they look, or how they taste, how they smell, how they feel, or what color they are. Those are all types of adjectives you may see in front of nouns. How do we use them to describe nouns? Well, let's look at a couple examples. The fuzzy gerbil ran across the room. So in this case, fuzzy is the adjective. It describes gerbil. It's describing what the gerbil feels like or looks like. It's fuzzy. I like to eat cheeses that aren't smelly. So smelly describes the type of cheeses that this person likes to eat. That marker is green. I wanted the red one. Here we have green and red describing different colors of markers. And again, anytime you see colors, those are adjectives describing the object, in this case, markers. I couldn't lift the heavy rock. That tells me how the rock is. It tells me it's a heavy rock. So again, we use adjectives to color our sentences, to give more life to what we're talking about, to specify things, as in that marker is green and I wanted the red one. That specifies between two different markers. The fuzzy gerbil ran across the room. That gives more life to, gives more description and more color to the sentences we're using. Or it could help us describe our preferences, as in I like to eat cheeses that aren't smelly. Or I couldn't lift the heavy rock. It gives a reason why you couldn't lift the rock. It's, well, because it was heavy. We also use adjectives to compare and contrast things. When we do this, these type of adjectives are called comparatives. To compare two objects, we use the adjective more, as in that dog is more playful than its puppy. So the adjective here is playful. I could say that dog is playful, but since I'm using it to compare it to another dog, in this case a puppy, I say that dog is more playful than that puppy. So I put the word more in front of the adjective to use it to compare. Likewise, I think you are more afraid than I am. I'm comparing you to me and our levels of fear by using more. So I think you're more afraid than me. And again, afraid is the adjective describing you or me, right? More is considered an adjective, but because it modifies an adjective and compares two adjectives, we call it a comparative. So that's what a comparative is. It's an adjective that's used to compare two or more objects. But sometimes I don't want to use more in front of the adjective. And that's not the right way or the correct way to compare two objects. An example of this is Johnny is funnier than Tim. Notice I wouldn't say Johnny is more funny than Tim, or more funnier, because that does not sound right. So I'm going to add the ER suffix. So I'm going to change the word funny to be funnier. And notice if I use a word like funny that ends in Y, I'm going to change the Y and add an I instead. So the Y becomes an I and I add the ER. But if it does not end in Y, I can just add the ER onto the adjective that I want to use as a comparative. So in that instance, if I want to say the little ball bounced higher than the big ball, then I wouldn't say the little ball bounced more high than the big ball. I would add the ER. The best way to know when to use more or when to use the ER is just simply how does it sound. Some things will sound funny if you say it's more higher than this. So you want to use the ER instead. Same thing with funny. It doesn't sound right if you say it's more funny than. Also, never use more and the ER together. Okay, so I would never say it's more funnier, more higher, more smarter. If I'm using the ER, I don't use more. And if I'm using more, I don't use the ER. I use one or the other. Now, what happens if I'm comparing 3 or more objects? I'm not just comparing 2 together. Well, then I use what's called a superlative. And a superlative is a word like most or largest. These are the words that end in EST. So it's not only ER, it's going to be that EST. So it's, or I'm going to use the adjective most. So for instance, if I have a sentence like Superman is the most powerful superhero of all, most is describing powerful. Powerful is the adjective that's describing superhero or Superman in this case. And most means that it's the superlative that's saying that he is the most powerful. So if I was comparing just 2 superheroes, so who's more powerful, Superman or Batman, I would say Superman is more powerful of the superheroes. But since I'm comparing them to all superheroes, so that's more than 2, then I would say most. Also, I can use it in a sentence like, who likes McDonald's the most? John, Mia, or Jennifer. So here again, I'm using it to compare 3 different people and how much they like McDonald's. If I was just comparing John and Mia, I would say who likes McDonald's more, John or Mia. But since there's 3 people, I'm using the superlative most. Most, just like more, is considered an adjective on its own, but since it modifies another adjective, it's called a superlative. Now, just like with more, sometimes it doesn't make sense to say most in front of the adjective. So in these cases, I'm going to add that EST suffix to the end. For example, if I have a word like smart, just like I wouldn't say more smart or more smarter, if I'm comparing Jill to the rest of the class, there's more than 2 people in the class, so that's going to use the superlative most or EST. I'm going to change smart to be smartest. And just like with more, I'm not going to use both most and EST when using this. I wouldn't say most smartest because that's redundant. I don't need to use both. I'm just using smartest. And some words, just like with funny, I'm going to change, if it ends in a Y, I'm going to change that Y and make it an I. So funny will become funniest. But just like with high, so if I was going to say, who's the funniest person in class, I wouldn't say who's the most funniest person in class or who's the most funny in class. It would be who is the funniest. Or if it's a word that doesn't end in Y, so like the word high, it's just going to become highest. I'm just going to add that EST ending to it, as in the sentence, the little ball bounced highest of all. So again, the rule of thumb is if you're comparing 2 things, you're going to use a word like more or the suffix ER at the end of the adjective. If I'm comparing 3 or more things, so more than 2, I'm going to use most or est. So a couple other things about comparatives and superlatives. So again, adjectives that are using to compare two or more adjectives. You only need one. You don't need to use more than one. So just like I was saying, if you're using most, don't use est. Don't change your verb to or your adjective to have the est ending. If you're using the est ending, don't add most in front of it. Same thing with more and er. You only use one or else it doesn't sound right. However, if you use them right, they make your sentences and your writing sound a lot better. Here's a couple examples. If you have a sentence like cheese is the most nastiest food on the planet, if you read that out loud, it does not sound right. Cheese is the most nastiest food on the planet, because I'm using two different superlatives, two different adjectives that are comparing to say the same thing. So I want to take one of those out. Which one do I take out? Well, which sounds the best? Is it cheese is the most nasty food on the planet? That doesn't really sound right. Cheese is the nastiest food on the planet. That one sounds right. So if I'm fixing that sentence, I'm going to change it to be cheese is the nastiest food on the planet. And what does that mean? It means if cheese is the nastiest food on the planet, we understand nothing is more nasty than cheese on the planet. Now, I don't agree with that, but some people might. All right, so that concludes our short lesson on comparing adjectives. If you are still confused, please rewatch, and you can always reach out to me, send me an email or a message on Google Hangouts, and make sure you answer the questions below this lesson, and I will see you next time. Take care.